with the hype train. Woo! Choo choo. Hey, everybody. Welcome to a Saturday morning, and a wonderful Saturday morning, might I add. If you're here with me right now live, that means it's 8 a.m. PST, 11 EST. We are live on another wonderful morning for Cafe BTW, a gaming morning podcast with your host, Andy, aka Love Retro BTW. We already had a hype train in here. I see all this love already. Phantom Cat Punch with the biddies. Thank you, sir. 15 biddies cheered. I appreciate it. I know Genzo sub. Thank you, Genzo. Shout out to everyone. Hope you all had a good week. We have a little hype train to start the show today. This is going to be an interesting show. I've been really enjoying not having guests, honestly. You know, sometimes I have guests on the show and sometimes it's just me. And when it's just me, we get to really dive into topics. And today, we are going to be talking about my most beloved console of all time, the Sega Saturn. But we'll do a little bit of a history lesson on it. We will. I don't want to go too deep in the whole history stuff. I want to make it more of a personal journey and why my parents' divorce directly affected me getting one in 1995. So I'm excited to talk about that. I hope everyone's well. I want to say hello to everyone in VOD land who doesn't make the live. We appreciate you as well. So hello. Hello from YouTube land or wherever you're watching the show. I want to say that I'm excited. There's a lot going on today. As you know, at the top of the show, we like to talk about kind of current events, any news tidbits happening. I want to hit off right at the bat just to remind everyone that if you like Twitter, I don't know if Elon Musk scared you away or whatnot, but I run the retro gaming community. It's the pinned tweet at the top of my actual account. You could join. It's a private place. We have over 2,100 members now in the retro gaming community on Twitter. We did a giveaway this last month, and we gave away Animal Crossing for the GameCube. Our next giveaway is launching next month, and we've already voted on 4 different consoles that I will be giving away a game for. We got Game Gear, Sega Saturn, 3DO, and Genesis. And look at the overwhelming response, especially with our episode today. The Sega Saturn is out in the lead. There's 2 more days to vote, so it looks like the next month retro gaming community giveaway is going to be a Sega Saturn game. Really excited about that. David says, my take, everything is on fire. Got it. Well, I hope it gets better for you and we can put some water on that, you know? That said, just airing my dirty laundry, I do have a YouTube channel. Genzo, if you want to share that in chat for me. If you missed the live, I put the VODs on YouTube. This isn't the type of podcast that you're going to hear everywhere. I don't do the whole audio thing across the board. We're not on Spotify. We're not on SoundCloud. We are literally on Twitch Live, and we are on VOD on YouTube. So those are your avenues to find the show. And that's it. If you want to watch past episodes, right at the top of my YouTube, you'll see all the past episodes. So there's plenty of VOD watching to do. Really excited to say that today, right here in SoCal, in Los Angeles, California, the Valley Retro Game Swap is coming back, and I will be there today. It's run by a local retro gaming shop called Game Realms, and every month they do a little swap meet where they have all these retro vendors coming. I actually have 2 things to pick up. I already pre-purchased a complete in-box Game Genie for the Genesis, and a gentleman that I know also has a Power Rangers for the Game Gear that I need to pick up here. And I might pick up a couple of games, but kind of holding back because next weekend is the big SoCal Retro event, which is a huge event coming up. Thanks for sharing the YouTube as well, Nightbot, who's also a friend of the show. Yeah, so good friend. I'll show you, actually. So Retro Respawn, which is an awesome store here in Los Angeles, he came across, let me see if I can find this. Let's see if okay. He came across a bunch of complete in-box Game Genies, and when I saw this, it's like Dylan, who owns Retro Respawn, who has been on this show before. We talked about being a video game shop owner. He had, look at these Game Genies. So I immediately said, dude, I want one. And they were only $35, where I think they list for about $55 on eBay. So I'm going to the swap meet because he's going to have a table, so I'm going to pick that up. Oh my God, we got another hype train again? Holy moly. Look at that, everyone. Holy moly. But I thought this was really cool. So today, going to be picking this baby up, or at least one of them, because I as soon as he posted this on Instagram, I was like, I got to buy one of these. So shout out to Retro Respawn, Dylan. And you can see they are still in our guest Nightbot stuff. So thanks, Genzo, for sharing that. If you happen to be in the SoCal area, Retro Respawn's an awesome shop. Let's get into some news before we get into the Saturn journey, because I do have an interesting story to share with the Saturn stuff. Someone bought a graded Nintendo Power for $108,000. Here's the tweet. CGC, who you might be familiar with, they do a lot of comic grading, and they also do magazine grading for video games. And they had a 9.8, which is the highest, or at least one of the highest scores you can get. I think you can get a 99, but that's super rare. Crazy that someone spent $108,000 on a magazine that I remember sitting in my basement in the 80s or whenever it came out. What is going on in the world? Who's paying $108,000 for a graded Nintendo Power? Unfreaking believable. I mean, I don't know what to say. Manny, great deal on a Game Genie. I picked up mine and named it Andy. You named your Game Genie Andy, Manny? Thank you so much. That's right. Shout out to Manny in chat. He also was able to pick up one of those Game Genies. You actually have it in your hands, so I hope it's you. I think you mentioned to me it's in great shape. But $108,000 for a Nintendo Power? What the hell is going on? I mean, I get it. I'm not really into grading video games. Definitely not. But the comic market is so kind of like involved in grading. So seeing a magazine graded doesn't really surprise me. But man, $108,000. Jesus, what the hell is going on? You better grade it, Genzo, so you can go buy, your big Porsche or whatever you might be. Also in the news, which was really interesting, Twisted Metal debuted the adaptation TV show that's going to air on Peacock is coming out. IGN exclusively revealed a new poster for Twisted Metal, which is officially described as high-octane action comedy, starring Anthony Mackie. The first teaser trailer came out. Though inspired by the classic PlayStation game series, the show is based on an original take by Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick, Deadpool and Zombieland, by the way, written by Michael Jonathan Smith of Cobra Kai. So they got some really cool people. There's our boy right there, Twisted Metal. Like, what do you guys think of this? According to the official synopsis, Twisted Metal follows a motor-mouthed outsider who is offered a chance at a better life, but only if he can successfully deliver a mysterious package across a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Really interesting. I don't know how I feel about this. Obviously, I wasn't a huge PlayStation person, but one game I played religiously as a kid in high school was Twisted Metal 1 and 2. Twisted Metal 2 being my favorite. This game, hours of fun. So, I mean, look, we're hitting this stride of like adaptation video games. Is it going to get oversaturated? Are we going to see just tons of shows adapting games? I think it's good I think it's just generally good. I'm okay with this, but let's hope that it's not terrible. Because, just because there's an adaptation of one of our favorite games doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be like the Super Mario Brothers movie and knock it out of the park, or shout out to Sonic, because I love the Sonic movies. Manny says, played a lot of Twisted Metal back in the day. I think a lot of people did. It was what could you say? Twisted Metal was awesome. All right, moving up in the news, there's some interesting things happening. I wanted to talk about this a little bit. The UK, that's right, our friends over the pond over there, they are trying to stop the Microsoft Activision $69 billion deal. So in London on April 26th, Britain will block Microsoft's $69 billion acquisition of Call of Duty maker Activision Blizzard over concerns it would hinder competition in cloud gaming, dealing an unexpected blow to the biggest ever deal in gaming. The country's antitrust regulator said on Wednesday that Microsoft's commitment to offer access to Activision's multi-billion-dollar Call of Duty franchise is leading cloud gaming platforms would not officially remedy its concerns. So really interesting. Is this ever going to go through? I don't know, but $69 billion is on the line here, folks, and the right to all this. So it's just interesting. I've been following this. I'm not like the biggest fan of the whole deal in a whole. I think that there comes a time when the more acquisitions we're getting, the less competition there is, the more monopolizing is happening. And I think a lot of people are scared that Microsoft owns Activision. Why couldn't they just say, going forward, you can only play Call of Duty games on your Xbox or PC? So it's kind of scary. Wanted to talk about that. But as you know, the show's topic today is one of my beloved, and by the way, this is an actual Sega Saturn I own with a wonderful CRT that I have. This is a 9-inch Orion CRT built-in DVD player with my wonderful Sega Saturn and action replay card on top of there. Looking beautiful with the wonderful wine bottle next to it on the left and some plants on the right. But that said, $69 billion, Genzo. Yes, I was not stuttering or mispronouncing the cost of the acquisition. $69 billion, sir. But that said, so the Sega Saturn, here it is. This is, if you follow my content, if you followed me through a journey, you know that one of my favorite, most beloved consoles, and I could say comfortably my favorite console of all time, just because it has a lot of personal connections to me, is the Sega Saturn. I was one of those rare U.S. Sega Saturn owners that way back in 1995. I'm going to get into a very personal story, but I didn't want to go too far into the history of the Saturn, but I think it's important to note a little bit about the Saturn. So what were the specs in the Sega Saturn? So the Sega Saturn had two 32-bit processors made by Hitachi, each clocked at 28.6 megahertz. They had 6 additional processors for various functions, including sound processing, graphic processing, input, output, and handling. 2 megabytes of RAM, 1.5 megabytes of video RAM. Video output resolution was 320 by 224 to 708 by 480 pixels. It had about 32,768 available colors, 4 sound channels with PCM and ADPCM support, 2D and 3D graphics support, including hardware acceleration for 3D graphics. Of course, it had a CD-ROM drive with capacity of 640 megabytes. It's funny when you mention megabytes, but back then, megabytes were like, a big deal to people. This was not like, these were big moves. And then the Sega Saturn was one of the first consoles to use hardware accelerators for 3D graphics, making it pioneering a 3D gaming experience. The console's unique hardware design with multiple processors was also seen as an innovation at the time. However, the Saturn's hardware architecture was notoriously difficult to program for, which made it challenging for developers to create games that fully utilize the console's capabilities, which was something we're going to get into a little bit here. That said, I think that we should mention just a few tidbits on how it was developed. And if you're in chat, I'd like to hear, did you own a Sega Saturn back in the day? Put it in chat. Let me know, what is your experience with the Sega Saturn? So, the Sega Saturn began development in 1992, following the success of its previous console, the Sega Genesis Mega Drive. The company wanted to create a new console that would be more advanced than its predecessor and would compete with other consoles in the market, such as Sony's PlayStation and upcoming N64. The development team behind the Saturn was led by the wonderful, and I'm going to butcher his name, and I'm really sorry, Hideki Sato. I thought I had a picture of him here. Here he is. Hideki Sato, who aimed to create a console that could display 3D graphics and support two-dimensional games with high-quality animations, which I think it did. The console was also designed to support multi-CPUs with a total of 8 processors, which were considered revolutionary for its time. And here's a little bit of clips of some of the wonderful games that were available for the Sega Saturn. Obviously, a big issue with the Saturn in the modern age is that because it didn't sell very well in the U.S. market at the time, and I'll tell you what, the Saturn was $400 in 1995. $400 in 1995. If anyone wants to do quick math on it, inflation, maybe that was around a feeling today of like $600. I might be wrong, or maybe it was like $550 or something like that. But that was no price to scoff at. That's pretty pricey. But there's something really unique about the Saturn. There were so many problems with the release of the Saturn in America, but what people don't seem to realize is that in Japan, the Saturn actually did pretty well. Then there's thousands of games in Japan. There's, I think, over 1,000 games in Japan. There's games that were never realized in the Western market. There's so many games we missed out on, but that doesn't mean there weren't good games here. Now, one person that was very important to the kind of the expanse and success of the Sega American market is the wonderful, legendary Sega CEO Tom Kalinske, who was the CEO of Sega America from 1990 to 1996. He became increasingly frustrated with Sega of Japan's decisions regarding the Sega's launch in North America. Kalinske was advocating for a later release for the console in North America in order to allow more time to develop a strong game library and marketing strategy. So there was a lot of, where when the Genesis was out, Tom Kalinske had a lot of freedom. Sega of Japan gave him a lot of freedom to like bring Sonic to our market, package Sonic with the Genesis, because he thought this is a game that the American market would definitely grab hold of. Genzo says today's inflation would be $814.67. Holy moly. So a system in 1995 sold for $400. Unbelievable. So Kalinske, frustration when he ultimately leaves Sega in 1996, only a year after the Saturn was released in America. So sadly, and this is, I'm going to show you a quick glimpse at the Sega Saturn announcement at E3 in 1995. This is a little reel video that they promoted. So let's watch.
You are approaching Saturn. You are only seconds away. I have arranged for you to meet my companion.
Very strange ad,
you.
by the way.
Watch and listen. Please, don't disappoint him.
Where do I get that Saturn hat, by the way?
He doesn't like that.
What is this? It's so weird.
We are 5 years away from entering the 21st century. Humankind stands on the edge of the interactive age. You have come a long way. But are you ready for the future?
I am.
Introducing Sega Saturn. Aw, hit it. Sega's next-generation gaming platform. Revolutionary sports
Nice hat,
and arcade gameplay. All with amazing new 3D experiences never before possible on home game systems. Wow.
Okay. That was literally the premiere Sega Saturn reel that was shown at E3 in 1995. Manny says Sega does what Nintendo don't. They were always more innovative than Nintendo. They should be making systems today. Well, they screwed that up. Once this came out and the Dreamcast came out, which was amazing, by the way. So was the Saturn really a nightmare to develop for, particularly in comparisons to other consoles with complex architecture like the Atari Jaguar and 64, developing 2D games compared to the PlayStation 1? That was a big thing with the Saturn. Were developers able to catch up with the kind of technology it has? That was a problem. But I wanted to show and talk about a little bit of a few reasons why the Saturn didn't do so well in America. So I'm going to go through a few things here. First and foremost, poor marketing and release strategy. Sega rushed the Saturn's release in North America, catching retailers and consumers off guard. The console was released several months earlier than planned with a limited selection of games and higher prices than its competitors. This resulted in a lackluster launch, negative impact on the console sales, and honestly, Sega released this way before it was supposed to come out in the US, and the developers that were already developing for the Saturn were like, what the F? What are you doing? We're not ready to market. So there could have been a whole bunch of great games released in its launch, but unfortunately, Saturn thought, let's get ahead of the market before it's ready. Another problem, difficult programming architecture, like we talked about it. The Saturn's complex hardware architecture made it difficult for game developers to program games for the console, which in turn limited the number of quality games available for the console. And I know a lot of this is negative, but it's really about what happened to it at the time. We're going to get into the love of it and why today, honestly, people really love the Saturn. So don't want you to get mistaken. These are not like saying that the Saturn's a bad console. It just, when it comes to marketing and in the US, it had its problems. So another problem for the Saturn was strong competition. The Saturn faced off competition from both Sony, PlayStation, and Nintendo at the time, which stronger the market campaigns, better graphics, and more accessible development environments also costs. So also a problem was high production costs. The Saturn's hardware was expensive to produce for, which meant the Sega had to sell the console for a higher price. So like Genzo said, inflation today was selling for almost over $800 in the US. Another major issue was the lack of third-party support. Sega struggled to attract third-party developers to create games for the Saturn, which limited the console's library, obviously, which was definitely an issue. So now, okay, so we gave you a little history lesson, right? But now I want to focus on a couple of things that are very important to me personally. Okay, so we could talk about the bad. But one thing bad that was going on in my life, and this is where it gets real personal, okay? And I'm not afraid to get personal. I must have been 12 or 13. My parents weren't happy. They had been married for 17 years. Turned out, and I'm okay sharing this, turned out my dad had an affair with somebody who eventually turned out to be my stepmother, who I love today. And my dad and my stepmother ended up having 4 more children, so I have a lot of siblings because of this. But at the time, I was a young kid. I didn't understand what was going on. But why am I talking about my parents' divorce? Because at the time, my dad felt so guilty that he was putting me and my brother through this, that he wanted to make up for it. So he looked at me and my brother one day and he says, "What do you guys want?" I know this sounds terrible. Was he bribing us? I don't think it was bribing. I think he was just feeling really bad that he didn't love my mom anymore, and he had an affair with someone that he did love, who ended up being my stepmom. So another problem was my dad's like, my stepmom, who he had an affair with, wants to move into his apartment. My dad lived in his own apartment after the divorce. They separated. So my dad's like, your future stepmother's going to be moving into my apartment. He's like, I'll buy you whatever you want if you're okay with that. I was a kid, I mean, this is tough. Being a kid of divorce, and I don't mean to get serious about this, but this is important. My parents' divorce directly affected me getting a Sega Saturn in 1995 because at the time, the timing of my parents' divorce and the timing of my stepmother moving in, or my future stepmother, she wasn't my stepmother yet, was that my dad would buy me and my brother something. Now, I chose the Saturn. And I still remember to this day, there was a store back in the day in the Northeast called Nobody Beats the Wiz. You might have heard of it. You might not have heard of it. It was very much like Best Buy back then. They had everything. They had everything from TVs to VCRs, whatever was out in those times, whatever they were selling electronic-wise. And they had the Saturn. So I vividly remember saying, Dad, I want you to buy me the Sega Saturn. This is what I want because you cheated on my mom and had an affair. And I still remember to this day, like it's yesterday. I remember walking into the Nobody Beats the Wiz, and behind the counter, there were a bunch of box Sega Saturns. There was this famous white box, and my dad asked the guy, he's like, "How much is it?" And the guy says, "This is $400." And my dad's like, "What?" He's like, "It's $400." And I'm not gonna take away from my dad. My dad was a very successful. He was a doctor in Manhattan. It's not like he couldn't afford it, right? But he felt very guilty. So out of guilt, that guy pulled that Saturn down, put it on the counter, and I could still vividly close my eyes and remember me looking at it with complete joy. It was very rare it was very rare for someone. Oh, whoa, we got a spammer here. Can someone? Thank you, Genzo. Hey, you've made it when you got someone spamming you in chat. I love it. But what I'm getting at in this very emotional story about my parents' divorce, what I'm getting about it is that it's funny how tragedy gives you the ability to bring something great into your life. Because back then in America, I was one of those rare friends of yours that had a Sega Saturn, right? Back then, not everyone had a Saturn. None of my friends had a Saturn. But there it was in my house, hooked up to my TV, and man, did I fall in love. And if you follow my content as you might, you'll notice that the Sega Saturn is something that's beloved. And it's actually one of the things in my collection that has survived. I have over 200 American-run Sega Saturn games. Now, it's this day and age, I would tell you to your face, do not collect the Sega Saturn because it's very, very costly. Games are very pricey. And lucky for me, I still have the Saturn games. Now, another thing was I didn't start collecting video games again until 2007. And in 2007, no one was paying attention to the Sega Saturn. But I was, because in 1995, I had one. Because I knew the Saturn was good. And if you think and look, and I did put a tweet out there asking people what they thought about the Sega Saturn. But today, there's kind of like a lot of people that say, I missed out on the Saturn. Man, what a cool machine, blah, 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 blah. So what's really just cool about it is that I already had known that the Saturn was a really cool console and there were tons of games. So in 2007, I was buying up games no one was looking at. I remember walking into a retro game store like Game Dude here in Los Angeles. They had a huge Saturn section and it just sat there and no one paid attention to it. And now there's all these collectors that want to own the Saturn games, but it's kind of too late because the market was such a failure here in the US that games are worth a lot of money. So that's really, I posted on Twitter that I was going to share that story. I think it's really important also for your mental health to talk about how my parents' divorce really screwed me up, sort of, but I can say happily that it brought a joy in my life, and I got to experience the Saturn in 1995. The Saturn had so many amazing games. One thing about the Saturn is that it was an amazing console arcade port with some of the best fighting games you've ever played on a console at the time. The fighting games were so good. Even 2D adventures, sure, it didn't have a ton of RPGs, but it had rail shooters like Panzer Dragoon. It had awesome awesome gun shooters and light gun shooters like Virtual Cop, House of the Dead. So a lot of people didn't realize in 1995 how many amazing games there were. So we're going to go through a little bit of the games that I love. Now, one of my favorite games ever, one of my favorite fighting games, and by the way, I love this game because the low entry to play it. Virtual Fighter is not like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter where you have to know all these crazy movesets. It's a very much a button mashing kind of arcade fighter, and you can easily pick and play this game right away. It doesn't have much of a learning curve. And also the kind of like blocky 3D look was very synonymous with Sega. Virtual Fighter 2 for the Sega Saturn was considered one of the console's best games due to its revolutionary 3D graphics, deep and accessible gameplay, arcade perfect port, they say, and an excellent multiplayer mode. I see that Manny says he knows it from Seinfeld. That's right. They made fun of Nobody Beats the Wiz on Seinfeld, but if you didn't experience it, actually. JN, welcome to the Cafe BTW podcast, says, side note, Biz Markie recorded the song Nobody Beats the Wiz. I grew up in South Carolina, so I didn't get the Wiz reference. Yeah, it's Nobody Beats the Wiz. Something like that. I'm sorry, I'm not doing it justice. So Virtual Fighter is definitely a game. Another game that stands out is not only were the fighting games great, it was the racing games. The racing games were awesome. Daytona USA is one of my favorite racing games, and I'll tell you what's even better, and I'm probably going to get a copyright strike on this song, but we're going to play it anyway. This is the wonderful, and I'm going to butcher his name, Tekken Obi Misuyashi. Oh my God, I just butchered that. Anyway, one of the best songs ever written for a video game is Let's Go Away. So let's hear him sing this song that stood out when you play Daytona USA. When you open it and put it into the Saturn, you're going to hear this. Let's listen to Let's Go Away. Yeah. Sing it with me, everyone.
From Daytona, USA.
My favorite part of the song is right here. So good. So good. So single-handedly, one of the greatest songs ever written for a video game. And man, is he awesome, guys. This video is about 11 years old, but I always go back to this video because it is super awesome. And just so you can't talk about the Sega Saturn without mentioning Daytona USA, and you can't talk about Daytona USA without mentioning the wonderful song Let's Go Away. Another game that I think is one of the best racers for a console. Honestly, my favorite racer on the console is the one and only Sega Rally Championship. So Sega Rally Championship for the Sega Saturn was a critically acclaimed racing game that featured impressive 3D graphics, realistic physics, and a fast-paced gameplay. The game's accessible and challenging arcade-style gameplay with various tracks and cars to choose from made it a favorite among gamers. Sega Rally Championship also introduced the concept of deformal changing terrain, which allowed the track surface to change based on the car's movements, adding a new level of realism to the game. The Sega Saturn version of the game was considered a faithful port of the arcade original and was praised for its graphics and sound. Sega Rally Championship is considered a classic racing game beloved by retro enthusiasts, and if you happen to be going to find a Saturn, I recommend playing Sega Rally Championship. It is a phenomenal game. There is no if, ands about it. Another series that's critically acclaimed, and you can't talk about this without mentioning, is the wonderful Panzer Dragoon, which is a rail shooter, eventually turning into a sort of RPG. When Saga came out, there were 3 games that came out on the Saturn. The Panzer Dragoon series is a classic set of rail shooting games that were developed by Sega, various consoles, including the Sega Saturn, eventually Xbox, and the PC. Set in a post-apocalyptic world, the game features a unique blend of science, fiction, and fantasy, with players taking control of a dragon and battling various enemies while flying through stunning environments. The series is known for its beautiful graphics, immersive soundtracks, and engaging gameplay that combines shooting, exploration, storytelling. The games have received critically acclaimed for their innovation of design, storytelling, and the series has become a beloved classic among retro gaming enthusiasts. Absolutely 100% accurate. Also, very expensive if you want to try to get the last one, which is Sega Dragoon Saga. Another game, if you're going to talk about the Sega Saturn, you cannot talk about it without mentioning it. Also, once you know how to play this game, it is absolutely fantastic. Beautifully made by the Sonic team, by the way. Nights in the Dream is a beloved platformer game developed by Sonic team for the Sega Saturn. The game features a dreamlike world where players control 2 characters, Knights, and they are Claris and Elliot. As they fly through various dreamscapes and complete objectives, the game's innovative gameplay mechanics, which includes a 360-degree flying, acrobatic, and score-based challenges, made it a unique experience at the time of its release. The game's beautiful graphics and an immersive soundtrack composed by Hataya, oh my God, butchering this, Tomako Sasaki also received critical acclaim for Nights in the Dream as it became a cult classic and is still celebrated today. Absolutely, and one thing it did bring us was the wonderful Sega Saturn 3D controller, which was, if you're going to play this game, folks, you need this controller. You can't play this on a regular Saturn controller. You cannot. Phantom Cat Punch says, yes, this was my intro to the system, was totally captivated by this game. Absolutely, 100%. Moving right along, and these are my favorite games that I'm pulling up here, is Guardian Heroes, one of the greatest, if not best, side-scrolling beat-em-up games ever made. And I'm totally okay saying that. Guardian Heroes is an action-packed beat-em-up game that was released for the Sega Saturn in 1996, developed by Treasure. The game features a unique blend of RPG elements, traditional side-scrolling gameplay, allowing players to customize their characters and choose their own paths through the game's branching storyline. The game's fast-paced combat, colorful graphics, and engaging multiplayer mode quickly made it a fan favorite amongst Sega Saturn gamers. With its innovative features like the ability to perform special moves using fighting game-style commands, Guardian Hero remains a beloved classic, a game that I am so happy I still own. I'm telling you, folks, this is one of the best side-scrolling beat-em-up games ever made, and it was on the Sega Saturn. One of the best. Also, just like, excuse me, I just burped. Also, a game that, and I don't know if I'm going to get a copyright hit on this on YouTube. Whatever. It's not like I'm looking to cash out on these videos or anything. Last Bronx. I'm going to play you the intro to Last Bronx, which is an amazing kind of virtual fighting style game. Let's watch the intro because it is so cool. It's like animation style. I'll let it speak for itself.
触らないで壊れやすい記憶に触らないで貴重な体に肌に錆びた色のスパイ山が古根を東京過去のメモリが生きてちゃできないリセットだからお願い触っていいよ私の内側に触れていいよメカニズムが今動く
So great. That intro is, so let me show you some gameplay. Last Bronx is one of my favorite fighting games. It is so much fun. If you've never played Last Bronx in your life, I recommend it. It's fantastic and fun. And it's all about weapons and using weapons. So think about Virtual Fighter, but with lots of different weapons. Hell yeah, what an intro, right? Hell yeah. And that is on the Saturn. When you put in the disc, that intro pops up and it's beautifully animated and it looks amazing on a CRT. But this game is not talked about enough, not appreciated enough. And I think I can't talk about the Sega Saturn without mentioning it because it's a game that I still play today. So rounding out a bunch of other games we can't talk about without mentioning, we have the wonderful Dragon Force, which is a fantastic game in its own right, and a game that's not very cheap these days to play as well. But as you can see here, I'm going through a list of just fantastic games because when you look back on the Saturn, a lot of people did not think it was a good system, but they just didn't know. Should there have been more games for the American release? Absolutely. Should have more Japanese Saturn games come over to the US? Absolutely. It was just a time. It came out at just a weird time, but there are so many great games here. I'm going to keep going down the list here. Another game is Sonic R, which was pretty fun. It's like racing without a car. You're literally running in Sonic R, but it's super fun, and that's Knuckles right there. Another game that I really enjoyed, a side-scrolling, beautiful game, is Astal, which has some of the best art for a side-scrolling platformer and a really good example of the power that the Saturn had for 2D graphics as well. besides 3D graphics, I mean, Astal is a beautifully crafted side-scrolling game. Pretty fantastic, unbelievable. And a lot of people don't remember this game or might not have played it. Moving right along, some more games to mention is Clockwork Knight, which kind of have that Toy Story vibe for its day, where you were a toy running through a toy place. I forgot when the original Toy Story came out and what the timing was. If this came out before Toy Story, because I feel like it did. I don't know. I'd have to look that up. But Clockwork Knight, also a good game to mention. Moving right along, another fun game, which I love this game, is Die Hard Arcade. Really fun, kind of interesting 3D beat 'em up. Fantastic. Also, if you like Die Hard, it's just kind of cool to have it. But fun, easy to play, and really fun with your friends as well. Another game, which I mentioned earlier, obviously is Virtual Cop, which is a fantastic shooter. The light gun for the Saturn is really good. You could have a lot of fun with this. It's like you're playing an arcade game at home. That's how fun and realistic this game felt at a time when you were able to play kind of like an arcade vibe at your own home. These shooters that are predominant in arcades back in the 90s, you could set this baby up with your CRT, shoot that light gun at the screen, and boom, you're done. Really, really fantastic game. Moving right along, another game that is kind of out of reach these days, and it's really unfortunate, is Burning Rangers, which was also developed by Sonic Team, the same people that brought us Nights into Dreams, same people that brought us Sonic. Burning Rangers is this kind of outlandish, futuristic firefighter game where you're putting out fires, and unfortunately, this game costs well into $1,000 these days. I really wish people had more of an opportunity to play this. I want to see them remake this game, do a remaster. This game deserves so much love. It doesn't have enough of it. It's a beautiful, beautiful game. Unbelievable game. Again, this is Burning Rangers, which a lot of people might not be familiar with, but what a fantastic game, honestly. Moving right along. Albert Odyssey, which is a fantastic game in its own right as well. Beautiful graphics. One of the greatest RPGs ever on the Saturn. And there weren't a lot in the US market. And people forget, the Japanese market had a ton of Saturn RPGs. There's a little bit of misconception there. But Albert Odyssey, which is a game I still have, beautiful looking game. Wonderful RPG. If you've never played it, you probably never will, because this is also pretty expensive. But I hope, again, there's a Saturn Mini in our future, because I think that it would do super well. And putting games like Burning Rangers and Albert Odyssey on there, Panzer Dragoon Saga, games that you can't afford would be just so perfect. Another game that I really enjoyed is Shining the Holy Ark, which is a fantastic game as well. Another example of kind of an RPG style game that looks good, plays good, and to be honest, was good. And as you can see, you know, it's not just about the Virtual Fighters of the world. It wasn't just about the Daytona USAs of the world. There were all these other fantastic games that came out in the US market, because that's our focus. You know, I'm from America, so we're focusing on the US market here. Moving right along, last game I'm going to kind of pull up today is Legends of Oasis, another fantastic game that just looks amazing and is well animated. The 3D graphics look really cool. Just a fantastic kind of action RPG. And I just, man, like, people just don't get it. They don't know how great the system was. Phantom Cat Punch says, wow, this looks great for the era. Wasn't familiar with this one. Yeah, and I hope that I kind of unlock a few things that aren't familiar to people, because a lot of people just don't know about these games. And I hope that this episode and anyone watching on VOD feels like, oh, wait a minute. The Saturn had some really cool stuff here, Andy. Thank you so much. Now, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole and keep going down pulling games. Let's hear from the community what they thought about the Sega Saturn. So every morning of my podcast, I always put kind of like a relative topic. So if you follow me on Twitter and on a Saturday morning you see a question that's usually relative to the topic I'm talking about today, and I usually read these on the show. Manny says, can you play American Saturn games in a Saturn import console? If you have an action replay card, I believe so. I do know for a fact you could play all regions with an action replay card, as you see on the Saturn. You just buy an action replay card, pop it in the back, and then you could play any Japanese port, any PAL port you want. I believe it's vice versa for the Japanese consoles for American games as well. Don't hold me to it, but I'm pretty sure. But if you're going to buy a Sega Saturn today, definitely get an action replay card. They're about $40, and they're absolutely worth it. That's what region unlocks a Saturn. It's really easy. You don't have to do any modding or weird stuff to your console. Just throw that cartridge in there and you're good to go. Let's read what people said. So my question was, what were your first impressions of playing the Sega Saturn? So hopefully it was getting more of an impression of the Saturn back in the day, not the missing the boat kind of impressions where people are like, oh, I missed the Saturn. But we'll see what we get. So They Still Call Me Seventh said, controller was too clunky and the launch lineup was too small. Didn't feel like I got my $400 worth, but eventually had a better controller and a decent library. The Retro Viking, shout out to him. He's a great guy on Twitter. I really like the console. I think it's pretty versatile with a lot of potential, but Sega relied way too heavily on arcade ports and not original software, so results, it was pretty weak library of games. Ricardo says, I don't even think I've played one. Sean Sanders says, confusion over the back slot. Interesting. CRT Gaming Heaven says, 1996, as an 11-year-old, I was blown away by Daytona USA, going straight to it from the Mega Drive to the Super Nintendo. Son says, the Sega Saturn was the third Sega console, and it was pre-PlayStation, and I loved it, and still do. Kitsune says, saw Virtua Fighter 2 in 1999 in a store display, walked out of the store with a Saturn, Virtua Fighter 2, and 4 other games. That says it all, I suppose. I think it does. Ryan says, good and underappreciated, but the PS1 has clearly beat it. McFly says, my stepbrother always got the latest consoles. I didn't get to play it too much, but from what I remember, it was decent. Fast forward like 10 years, and my friend of mine had a controller CD combo that we played the entire NES library off of. LOL. Let's go down. Jason says, finally got arcade at home. Loved Daytona. Didn't care about the clipping or low frame rate, but loved Virtua Fighter, as that was the pack-in game. Dr. Legend says, it was my first Sega console, and I loved it. Got it for Christmas when they were pimping the 3 free games included set. That's cool. I have that. It was like having an arcade at home. And you see, we got a running theme here. It was like having an arcade at home. I love that. Daniel Smith says, the console design is minimalistic. Interesting. 2PT Podcast says, woed by the Nights in the Dreams display demo unit, but didn't pick one up till later in life. Fair enough. William says, I should have got a PlayStation. That's funny. Kat says, why do I have to keep setting the date and time? Is there a crappy battery in the back? Yes, that means your battery is out. You should get that fixed. Pete says, the first Saturn I got was with a 4 megabyte RAM card and X-Men vs. Street Fighter. Being able to play such an amazing port of the game after playing an awesome PS1 port was amazing. Sucks that Sega of America didn't bring the RAM card and games stateside. Feed Me says, my dad's friend had all the racing and gun games, and the 3D graphics weren't super terrible. I thought it was the most incredible thing ever at the time. I like having an arcade in your house. Well, again, with the arcade at your house. I love these. And everyone, thank you so much for your input. I love sharing how the community feels. It's not about me. It's also about how you all feel. And finally, last one I'll read here is Sam says, this is some next level shit. Love that. Thanks everyone that put in questions. I can't read them all, but I really appreciate everyone that put in their own input. And by the way, this is my Sega Saturn. This is not a picture stolen from the internet. This is me. This is mine with my action replay card, and you could see a bunch of my Saturn games underneath it. I have my whole Saturn collection here with me. And I was so excited to kind of talk about this episode. Obviously, we do not have a guest today, but we are rounding out the back end of the episode. I do want to say that I hope you all enjoyed a kind of look back at the Sega Saturn with a little bit of a personal spin, sharing the story of my parents' divorce and how my parents' divorce directly affected me getting a Sega Saturn 1995. It was a tragedy to lose my parents as a married thing, but you know what? If it wasn't for the divorce, I wouldn't have had a Sega Saturn. I'm going to be closing out the show today. I just want to be a reminder to anyone that is local to the area that let me back up here. I will be today, if you happen to be in Los Angeles, around 2 o'clock, I will be at the Valley Retro Game Swap, picking up a few things, saying hello. So if you happen to be in SoCal and you want to say hi to me, I'm happy to say hi. I love people, love seeing people, and I'm really excited to just be a part of the community today, because that is what I care about the most, everyone, is community. Being around people means a lot to me. Being able to support the community in any way, shape, or form I can. So I'll see you at the retro shop. And if not, I hope everyone has an amazing weekend. I want to thank everyone that joined me on the live today, because it is a treat to have you all here, because you are the guest hosts. When it's just me, my chat are the guest hosts. So I really appreciate everyone in chat. And also a nice shout out to everyone on VOD on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching the show. We missed you on the live, and that's okay. That's what these VODs are for. Until next time, I'm Andy. My socials are below. And remember, we only get one shot at this. So you know what? You know what they say? You might as well be nice to people. All right, babes out there, ladies, men, people, all the people out there. I don't know. We love you. We love you. Oh, I put on the wrong one. It's this one. Until next time, we'll see you there. Take care.